You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is an author, communications trainer, and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share with your friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Welcome to today's edition. And Alper, what do you have on your mind today?
Actually, I've been waiting for this day for more than a couple of days because I was going over our notes for the upcoming episodes.
Okay.
And I saw one under your column, and I've been dying to ask something about. I see the words "talk to the dog," just to be clear.
Okay.
What are you talking about? Is this the right spreadsheet that we're looking at?
Yeah, you're in the right place. You found the right spreadsheet.
Okay, just to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me.
So talk to the dog. It started a few years back, and I had a client, and this client was an engineer for a solar power company or something like that. And he was doing a presentation for some potential investors. And his presentation would have been great for engineers. You know, if he gave that same presentation to fellow solar power engineers, they would think it was the best presentation that they had ever seen. They would pick the guy up on their shoulders and they would parade down the street cheering and yelling his name.
Oh boy, I see flashing warning signs.
Yeah, but the potential investors that he was talking to or that he was preparing to talk to, they would have been completely unimpressed. They wouldn't have understood a single word he was saying. They would have walked out of there just angry at him for wasting their time in life. And so this is what gave rise to Talk to the Dog. And so my client, he was giving the presentation to me. He was practicing the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, so he looks at me and he says, "Well, Matt, what do you think?" And I said, "Okay, well, talk to the dog in the language of the dog about the things the dog cares about." And so that's what gives rise to today's topic. And when I say talk to the dog, I don't mean that humans are dogs. I don't mean anything bad about them. I don't mean, disrespect humans. I don't mean kick them. I don't mean feed them trash. I don't mean any of the things.
I love dogs.
Yeah, I love dogs too, but some people are afraid of them. So I don't mean anything bad about it. I'm not putting anybody down. It's just that this is a good phrase to remember when you are speaking to people who are not your kind. And I can give you a tangible example of what that means. Should I do that?
Yeah. But before that, I want to ask, what would be one of the benefits of it? I mean, I have some idea, but can you clarify that?
Well, first of all,
why bother with this idea?
Yeah, the biggest benefit is that you end up with a presentation that is relevant to your audience, and so they care about what you're saying, rather than a presentation that you think is great and that your buddies back at the office think is great. You end up with a presentation that is relevant to your audience. That's the first biggest benefit. The second benefit, and this isn't a benefit that I had thought about before, but then one of my clients mentioned it to me a couple of years ago, and I thought, wow, that's a pretty good benefit to bring. And what he mentioned was that the big benefit that he got out of using this approach or running his presentation through this filter, the big benefit that he got out of running his presentation through this filter was that his presentations were much shorter. And I guess it was because his presentations were more focused. He knew what he had to say, and it was easier for him to put them together because he knew who he was talking to. He knew what he had to say, and parentheses, he also knew what he didn't have to say, which ended up being most of it. A lot of the things that people say in their presentations are not relevant to the audience at all. And if they cut them out, they save a lot of time.
Why do you think they included it in the first place?
Because it's important to them. If I'm, for example, I'm going to kind of get into a recent example. If I'm a software engineer, for example, I've got a lot of things that if I'm a software engineer and I am presenting to let's say to warehouse employees about a new software system that I'm developing and they're going to use. There are a lot of things that are relevant to me and that I consider extremely important that they just don't care about. And if I cut those things out, my presentation will be a lot shorter. It's kind of like, how they talk about that some years back. I still hear it. I just don't hear it as much. But that metaphor that people use in a radio signal, signal versus noise. How much of this is signal and how much is noise?
Yeah.
How much of it is signal? How much of it is stuff that I need to pay attention to? And how much of it is just noise? How much of it is just junk that I don't need to know? This filter helps you cut the noise out and make more of your presentation signal. Shall I give you an example?
I want to ask you something.
Okay.
Yes, and okay, let's hear the example first.
Okay.
Maybe I will have my answer in the example.
Okay, so here's the example. Recently, I was working with a software engineer in like I said, and he was developing some software for a warehouse application. So there were people with forklifts and tote boxes and conveyor belts who are going to be using his software. And talk to the dog goes like this. The phrase, remember, talk to the dog is talk to the dog in the language of the dog about the things the dog cares about. So there are 3 points. And
yes.
so first of all, if you're that software engineer, the first part of that, talk to the dog, is remember that in this case, the dog is warehouse employees. The dog is not software engineers. So you're not talking to your buddies back at the office. You're talking to warehouse employees. Maybe they're a warehouse manager. Maybe they work on the floor. Maybe they're a supervisor, maybe not. Who knows? But they're not you, and they're not your buddies back at the office. So that's the first point. Talk to the dog. The second point is, talk to the dog in the language of the dog. And this is in the language of the dog. That's the second part. And that's a really hard one for a lot of people, because that's probably the most difficult one for a lot of people, because every day, if you're a software engineer, every day you use software engineering vocabulary. You describe your project in software engineering vocabulary. Maybe you use words like, database or latency or something like that. Maybe you use, words like client server, blah, blah, blah. These words mean absolutely nothing to your audience if you are speaking to warehouse workers. With the language that they use, they don't use words like latency. They use words like computer speed or just speed. If I'm on the warehouse, let's say I'm on the floor on the warehouse, and I need to pick a product. I need to get a product and place it in a box. And the software is going to tell me where in the warehouse that product is. You might use the word latency and database. You, the software engineer, when you want that information, you think about things like database and latency, but that's not what the floor worker in the warehouse thinks. The floor worker on the warehouse wants to know, okay, when I punch in the item number, item number 123, when I punch in item number 123, is it going to take 10 minutes to tell me where I can find item 123, or is it going to do it in 2 seconds? So again, there's database, there's latency, but those are definitely not the words that your audience is using to describe the situation. So that's the second thing, is talk to the dog.
That's the second part.
Yeah, in the language of the dog. So make sure that your presentation, your slides, the words you use when you're speaking, make sure that you purge your professional vocabulary out of it and use the professional vocabulary of your target audience. And the third thing is, talk to the dog about in the language of the dog. So the third thing is about the things the dog cares about. And that's a much easier thing for people, because it's easier for them to relate to. But again, the vocabulary is a little different. If I am, the line worker in the warehouse, maybe what I care about is filling a lot of orders. You also care about that as a software engineer. It's just that you're going to use different words to describe it. Let's say that I'm the warehouse manager, and one of the things that I care about most is impressing my boss. You also care about impressing your boss. And the way the warehouse manager does it, one of the ways that the warehouse manager does it, might be to cut costs, for example. It might be being able to go to the manager's boss and say, hey, boss, it used to take us 5 minutes to pick a product, and now it takes us 4.5 minutes to pick a product. Those are the things that your audience cares about. And so those are the things that you need to talk about in your presentation. That's what I mean by talk to the dog.
Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of the time, but I don't want to let you go before asking something which I had
Okay.
on my mind originally.
Sure.
I understand the principles of talking to the dog in the language, and about the things that the dog cares about.
Okay.
But let's say I am the prospective presenter and I want to apply this filter.
Okay.
My question is, if I already had an understanding of this concept, would I not have started creating my content already pushing things through this filter? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, if I'm not using this, would I ever be competent to utilize this filter? It seems to me like you either have it or don't have it, or not like you either have it or don't have it, but if your presentation content needs to be pushed through this filter, how you as a presenter could have seen it beforehand?
Use this filter before you start making your presentation. Use this filter in one of the earliest stages of your preparation. If you haven't used this filter or a filter like it, if you haven't used a filter like this, you are not ready to start your presentation, or you are not ready to start preparing your presentation. Because what is this filter
So in
tell
the
you?
case of the software engine,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
What does this filter tell you? This filter tells you who you're talking to. It tells you what language you need to use. And it tells you what's important to the people standing or sitting in front of you. You need to know those things before you start preparing your presentation. And there is no level of sophistication that escapes using this filter. You cannot say, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't need to use this filter anymore. You still need to use this filter. Maybe if you've been doing it for 20 years, maybe it only takes you 3 seconds to use this filter. That's great. Congratulations. Good for you. I'm not saying that you need to spend, 3 months using this filter, but if you've been doing this for 20 years, maybe using the filter takes 3 minutes. If you've just started using the filter, maybe using the filter takes you an entire week. Whether you are using it for the first time or whether you've been doing this for 20 years, you're still basically using the filter.
So in the case of the software engineer presenting to the warehouse, how can the software engineer, if the presenter needs to apply this filter,
Okay.
how can he or she determine the whole sizes of the filter in this case? For example, how can they know what to omit, what to take out, what to keep in the presentation?
Talk to your audience and get to know them, which is in the natural cycle of life is probably going to happen to you anyway. So you don't need to be sophisticated about it. If you're a software engineer making software for warehouse people, you probably have talked to a warehouse person, at least on the phone, at least once in your life. You've probably talked to a software person. So you don't need to be sophisticated. You don't need to make these great, brilliant scientific surveys or anything like that. Just think of the people that you work with, and they are the holes in your filter. And if you only know one person, if you're a software engineer and you are producing some software for a warehouse person and you only know one of them, that's fine. Of course it would be better if you knew 10 of them, then you could average them out or something. But even if you just know one, that's way better than knowing none. And you probably know at least one. So imagine that person sitting in front of you while you're preparing your presentation. Imagine yourself sitting at a coffee shop or conference room table or something, explaining your software to that person.
Okay. So I understand the filter is somewhat hypothetical because we're putting ourselves in the shoes of other people who will be listening to us.
Correct.
And trying to find out the points that they would be interested, trying to find out the words that they would be connected to.
Correct.
And trying to estimate the ways or the goals that they would want to achieve, so that we would tailor our message to match that. Do I understand you correctly?
Yeah. And before we wrap up, there's one other thing that I just wanted to emphasize yet again about this talk to the dog filter. And that is that this filter, talk to the dog, it sounds extremely simple, 3 parts. And yes, it is extremely simple. And using it is extremely simple. But you would be amazed at how many people do not use it. And that's, I think, it personally, in my opinion, that's a big reason that we have problems like death by PowerPoint or boring presentations or whatever you want to call them, whatever name you want to give them, is we have those things because people are not going through these very obvious steps. So just because it's obvious does not mean that you don't have to do it.
And how did you become aware of this?
Just because I sat through a boring one myself. Remember that solar power engineer that I told you about? I became aware of it because I heard him giving his presentation and thought, this is brilliant. However, this guy's going to fall flat on his face. It's going to be a complete disaster, and you need to save him from this disaster. So that's how I became aware of it, by sitting through one myself.
Well, you have experience.
Yes,
All right. Okay. So thank you for relieving my curiosity when I looked at the spreadsheet about what Talk to the Dog was.
You're welcome.
There is one more on the spreadsheet which I'm going to ask you in the next episode, but
great.
we'll leave some curiosity for that.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. I'll talk to you next time.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks for the wisdom. All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.